So, first off, Karen, I just wanted to thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me. This is for the Wellness Moonshot initiative, and the audacious purpose of the initiative is to create a world free of preventable disease. That's a pretty big deal in more developed parts of the world. That usually means lifestyle behavior. In places that aren't quite as developed, it can mean everything from hygienic infrastructure, water supply, etc. So it's a big mission that can bring the whole world together. And every month we talk about a particular topic in wellness leadership. This month is an unusual word, and the word is Allot. And the reason I asked you, and that's not Allot, A-L-O-T, that's A-L-L-O-T. And the reason I asked you in particular around this word is because I know you, as the president of the Health Enhancement Research Organization, HERO, does amazing research in the area of not only wellness at work, but more specifically looking at wellness at work with marginalized groups, often marginalized groups, underserved voices. So, really, where the intersection of wellness, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility come together. And so, I wanted to just talk to you today about what you're learning from that research. And so this will be shared with, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
Terrific. Thanks, Renee. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, first question for you is what do you see are the links between wellness, and I'm going to say wellness and well being, because sometimes people use those words interchangeably. You tell me how you want to define that, but wellness, well being, and then diversity, equity, inclusion, and then accessibility. All of those are equally important. So, what links are
Yeah.
you seeing so far as you all are thinking about that with Hero?
Yeah, lots of directions we can go. I'll try to make sure to hit on all of them. So we'll start with the definition that Hero has adopted. The definition of health and well-being that Hero has adopted comes from the Healthy People 2030 initiative, and it's how people think, feel, and function at a personal and social level. So social, bringing in that diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how they evaluate their lives as a whole.
Okay.
Um, we quickly at Hero, we quickly go to from that, we quickly go to health equity, and then talking about equity versus equality, and then the accessibility. So I'll try to sort of weave that or follow that lineage. The WHO defines health equity as it is achieved when everyone can attain their full potential for health and well-being. So you see that circle already.
Yep.
Um, and Healthy People 2030 goes on to say that achieving health equity requires valuing everyone equally. So DEI is right there, and the elimination of health and healthcare disparities. So it's important to distinguish, like I said, between equity and equality. Whether we're talking about the well-being of citizens in a community or employees in a workplace, we have to ensure that resources are directed appropriately or allotted to meet people where they are. And inherent to this process is the diversity of the teams and the personnel who are giving input into those decisions. Important, the diversity of the research methods that are being used, and that the research is including a diverse group of people or organizations. So providing the same type and number of resources to all is just not enough. It has to move from equality to equity. And then accessibility, you mentioned, and those are all just woven so perfectly together. Accessibility is the design of the products, devices, services, vehicles, health and well-being programs, so as to be usable by all people, and accessible for all people. And where we've seen accessibility really come to a head in the past couple of years is the mental health crisis that was already occurring before the COVID pandemic, but certainly brought to spotlight in the pandemic. And the accessibility to mental health services, one, and the enough mental health providers, but also accessibility to people who look like me, to accessibility to a provider who looks like me or you, and down the line, so that there are enough providers and that they are accessible, but also accessible to all diverse groups, so that there's a comfort there with the care that's being given. We and employers being supportive of those programs, giving access or giving employees access to those services, to health and well-being, or to the mental health services, to be able to take advantage of that during work hours. That's huge. And then leaders providing support, communicating about the services, helping to make, so still along the mental health example, helping to integrate between EAP and their traditional health and well-being offerings, and making sure there are warm handoffs between the well-being coaches and the EAP mental health coaches. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of directions we can go on this,
Well,
but they're all connected.
They're all connected, and that's actually what I'm getting from even your description, and that's what I'm also appreciating about your description. And that is, you've been in this field for many, many years. I've been in this field for many, many years, and we have really seen wellness go through a transformation, wellness programming in organizations go through a transformation from being a check the box, I've done this, to truly becoming more of a priority to the organization's success and the thriving of its people. And I believe the way you're describing this, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, if you take those DEIA kind of as its own bucket, for lack of a better word, or an initiative, it's also moving from that check the box mentality into this much more integrated approach. So what I hear you saying is there are so many connections from the voices that are heard to create and set well-being and wellness strategy, to how the research is done, to how the strategies are put in place, to what's implemented, to who receives it. I mean, all down the line at every place in that kind of that thought process and implementation process, you have to be thinking and prioritizing DEIA. I'm just going to keep saying DEIA, but for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. As you are,
we can start a new acronym, DEIA. We can start it right here. Yeah,
we could. Well, I actually think it should be DEIAW, because I think we part of that integration is thinking of these things all together. Fundamentally, they're all looking at sort of the same foundation. How do we create an environment where all people can thrive? It's it's that similar principle.
that's right.
So, what are you seeing as far as organizations weaving diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, their strategies, initiatives, etc., and their wellness slash well-being, their priorities around that? How are you seeing them weave them together so far?
Yeah.
And what's
Well,
missing? That's also, and maybe it's easier to start with what's missing, where you see the gaps are. Either way.
So a few things that we saw, and again, the pandemic has really helped to bring this to the forefront of conversations, more so than maybe it has been. It's more mainstream across all organizations than maybe with just the few who were seen as best practice organizations or organizations with all the resources. But really, integrating, not siloed. I mean, we've already touched on that. I was reading something recently that said inclusion can drive well-being, but well-being can also drive inclusion. So just, that connection between the two. I'm seeing organizations create new roles in the C-suite. So in fact, we have on our board the Chief Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer for Adventist Health and the Wellbeing and the Blue Zones Wellbeing Institute. And so that's just, to have it named at the C-suite is such a strong indication that DEI is being woven and will be woven into all aspects of the organization. and that comprehensive well-being strategy will include that DEI AW being woven throughout it. One feature that many organizations have been doing for years, but many adopted in the last couple of years, is employee resource groups. So providing space for groups with shared interests and shared backgrounds, and providing that social connection for individuals with a common sort of common connection is an important aspect of well-being, that social connection piece. But also those employee resource groups are open to others who may not be included in that group. They might not be Black men and women or people of color, but want to learn more and come alongside and understand and come alongside as allies. Just an example, the employee resource groups can cover a number of interests. It may not just be in the sort of traditional diversity, equity, inclusion space, but it certainly was highlighted as a way that organizations were beginning to be open their eyes to the different needs of different employee groups. One example that I love, and I know you know this because we were on a panel with Denise Bober back last year when Denise talked about the Breakers Palm Beach launching launching a program specifically and only for their employees of color. I mean, that is just mind-blowing for some organizations to even consider that there would be a targeted program for a specific group of people. And I'm so excited to watch that program and to see what kinds of outcomes are coming. You may have more information than I do, but I know it was beginning to launch when we had that panel. So I think it's one to watch, and I hope that other organizations will be watching as well.
Are you seeing any other examples? So the Breakers is a fantastic example and have been for years, really progressive in the ways that they have held wellness as a priority for the company, not only for customers, but for employees. So they really have done that for many years, and that just continues to evolve into new ways, new programming, et cetera. Have you seen any other examples that you would say, I think this organization really is providing a good role model because of this thing they're doing, like the Breakers has done? Any others that you can cite, and you may not be able to share?
No, I can't. This example I talk about in all of my presentations, and there's no commission paid. I just think it is just a fabulous example. So Graystone Bakery, based in Yonkers, New York, has an open hiring policy. And so this starts to get to the social determinants of health. So the conditions where we live, learn, work, play, and pray, and organizations, employers realizing that they do have the ability to positively influence and impact those conditions outside of the traditional workplace walls. And those traditional workplace walls sort of dissolved in the pandemic for many, right? It became a home, remote, virtual. So Graystone Bakery in Yonkers, New York, has an open hiring policy, which means that they don't put that average $4,500 per employee hired into recruitment and hiring. They put it into, they hire the next person through the door. When there's a job opening, the next person on the list gets hired for these bakery positions, and they instead redirect and invest that $4,500 into education and training and supporting those new employees. And one thing that happens when they're doing this is that the majority of their workforce is previously incarcerated, and they are literally impacting the poverty level in Yonkers, New York by providing this, just completely changing the hiring dynamic or the hiring processes that you would traditionally think, and really impacting the financial security of individuals and a community as a whole, and now have a center for open hiring in which they are educating other organizations on how to do it also.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful example. And to me, that's an example of well-being leadership, like how you use not only your title, your role, your personal energy, but how you use your organization's assets to lead and advance well-being for the benefit of all people. In particular, right now we're talking about people who often aren't included in some of the strategies, the wellness strategies and the wellness programming, at least in the past. I mean, I do think that is shifting. So,
Yeah.
what do you think is required of leaders to really shift in this direction, to really be the kind of leader that is thinking in the way? So, I imagine right now talking to the CEO of Graystone Bakery and saying, what was it that occurred in your mind, or in your being, or in your life experience that
Mhm.
led you to believe that your organization could facilitate the well-being and development of others, and you would really strategically use it that way? So what is it that has to occur within
Oh my
leaders?
gosh, what a question, Renee. So I'm going to start with the rest of the last question about what's missing. And you just sort of hit on it too. So many organizations are missing a strategy for health and well-being. We the Hero Scorecard. So the Hero um, Health and Wellbeing Best Practices Scorecard in collaboration with Mercer, full name, free online tool, and it's an educational tool, but we've been able, because of the robust data set that we've gained from that Hero Scorecard, we've been able to do some analysis and some research studies based on the organizational responses to that scorecard. And I think it's something like 15% of organizations said that they had a strategy for health and well-being. So that's what's missing.
And
But
Karen, let's just pause for 1 second. So for the person who's listening to this and doesn't know about the Hero Scorecard,
yeah,
give us a one sentence description of what that is, so that if they want to go use that scorecard, they know what they're getting into. Because
sure.
I think it's such a powerful tool and it's been around for a long time now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
give us a sentence of what it does.
One sentence. This might be a really long run-on sentence. Uh, it is an organizational scorecard based on evidence, the research, the evidence that is divided into 6 sections of best practices that organizations can assess how they are actually doing against best practices and learn and understand what the opportunity is to improve from there
It's when it comes to health and well-being.
when it comes to health and well-being specifically. Yes.
Yeah,
Our,
right.
and that I'm glad you used that image. It has broadened, the umbrella has broadened. Our current iteration, our current version of the Hero Scorecard, out for about a year now, also includes community investment in community health and well-being, and mental and emotional health, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social determinants of health. Like, it includes all of these
Wonderful.
topics that we've touched on. So it's been a useful tool for a lot of organizations to learn and grow.
And so what you're saying is, with that in mind, about 15% of the companies that have used the scorecard, you have found, don't actually even have a health and well-being strategy in place. So it hasn't been something that has really been in their consciousness. Is that what you said?
The flip of that, only 15% have a
Have a
strategy.
strategy in place. Okay, well, let's make sure we get that correct on the recording. 15% have a health and well-being strategy in place. So
Right.
85% don't
Just
have a health and well-being strategy that they
it,
strategically use. And we know all the research beyond the Hero Scorecard that says there's such a clear, I mean, you don't even have to create a business case anymore. There's such a clear link between when you prioritize health and well-being of your employees and your customer service, your profitability, your ecological concern, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it just goes on and on. So
does.
85% are really missing this lever that could really be in improving the effectiveness of their organizations and the employee experience.
Or they're, so they might be, because they're taking the scorecard, they probably are doing something for health and well-being, but it's not woven into their strategy. They're probably doing a program or two, but not thinking about not thinking about workplace health and well-being as a comprehensive, integrated approach. It's a very siloed, throw something at the wall, see what sticks kind of thing.
So as far
But
as the business, a little more of it as an afterthought, or
that's right.
something that you do, but it's not core.
Right,
What needs
right.
to happen with the business?
But like we've already talked about on here, is that if you're going to, that well-being and DEI are linked, and if you're going to be able to address both effectively, it has to be integrated and part of a strategy.
Totally, totally. And so I'm going to ask you again, because now the question's more important, which is what has to happen within us as leaders to prioritize, to really, truly, fundamentally believe that the health and well-being of people is a priority, including our own health and well-being, by the
Sure,
way.
sure.
And the reason I ask that is because we've got enough data that says that's true. So I don't think the answer is data.
Yeah.
I mean, I think data is supportive, but it's got to be a deeper shift that has to
So
occur.
yeah, so I think there are some things that are beginning to occur and need to continue. I think that business school education has to reinforce it. Like we've got to start at the beginning, at the base level. I think that leaders who, well, there are studies and articles written about that draw the link that you talked to, linking health and well-being best practice companies to business success. And if you define business success as shareholder value, stock value, there are studies that show that direct link. Companies who do X get Y and outperform the S&P 500. So what can leaders do? So that's what can leaders do internally to support these health and well-being practices. Another Hero Scorecard research study, if you'll bear with me, it drew a connection between workplace well-being best practices and health and business outcomes, and it found that organizational and leadership support are among the strongest and most consistent predictors of an organization's ability to drive participation and well-being and influence employee health outcomes and drive down those healthcare costs. And we actually have a top 10 list of the things that leaders can do and that organizations can do to support. Workplace policies that encourage healthy behaviors, inviting employee involvement and feedback from all groups. And this is so important. When I talk about the work that Hero has done around social determinants of health, and we talk about starting with the data, and you named it, there's so much data, but it's often overlooked that possibly your best data is just listening to your employees. Hearing where their pain points are.
Right, asking the
question, and from all groups, right, and making sure that DEI lens is applied and that you really are getting, hearing all the voices, connecting health and well-being to broader business results in strategy and in reporting. Fourth is encouraging managers and leaders to participate in the programs, walking the talk. Fifth is providing regular program performance updates to stakeholders, so that accountability piece. Developing a written strategic plan. We've already harped on incorporating health and well-being into the company mission, vision, goals, and value statements, and senior leadership communications. Wellness champions, that's a term that's been around for a while, but it's important. Identifying wellness champions and ambassadors and equipping them to promote a health and well-being culture. supporting mid-level managers, and I'll say manager training is one key area that is getting a lot of focus right now, is just making sure everybody is in such overload and, approaching burnout mode. So giving support to the managers so that they can support the well-being of their teams, and consistently communicating about health and well-being in targeted ways to different employee groups.
Hmm.
There's your top 10.
Yeah, I love it. I actually love the list, by the way. I think that's a super helpful list. Um, and a couple things that, in the list, everything about that list feels like it's a whole integration of of health and well-being into every part of the organizational system, whether it's policies, practices, communication strategies, etc. It's like all 10 underlying it is about, no, this, it's time to integrate health and well-being into every major discussion. Like health and well-being needs a seat at the table.
That's right.
And when we're talking about well-being, I know you mentioned how Hero defines it, but as we're talking about it, we really are talking about well-being of everyone, truly an inclusive global
Mhm.
way of thinking, a mindset
Yeah.
about well-being. And so it's really giving that much more of a priority. I'm totally with you. You mentioned a while ago about how the pandemic has really served to elevate this conversation all
Yeah.
around the world. And as much as I would never wish a pandemic on anybody, it's been so hard for all of us. Some groups way more than others.
Yeah.
It certainly has at least created so much more of a crack of so so many, it's widened honestly so many cracks so that we can truly see
Season.
this is how important this discussion is.
That's exactly
Um,
right.
yeah. So, anything else you think that the Wellness Moonshot community should know about this whole idea of how do we ensure in how we lead, in our mindsets, in our actions, in how we define leadership as wellness leaders,
Mhm.
that we are making sure that it is equitable, making sure that we are truly resourcing all people or allotting the
Mhm.
resources in a way that really does support all people. Anything else
Yeah.
that you feel like we've missed in this conversation?
I don't think so. Well, I'll just point, Hero does have a resource, action steps for employers to address social determinants of health, and it's focused
Right.
specific in four specific areas. There are more than four social determinants of health to be addressed, but this report focuses on financial security, food security, housing, and social connection. Maybe transportation is in there. But so that resource is there. It's free on our website. I think we have to keep talking about it. When George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020, it really reignited a national conversation, and that conversation has to continue for us to make headway and keep that progress, and not backslide. We can't, there's so many talk about bouncing back from COVID, and yes, we need to bounce, but we need to bounce forward. We don't want to go back to what it was 2 years ago. We don't want these last 2 years to be a waste of learning and enlightenment, and we just need to keep talking about it and having these conversations.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that's going to keep happening if people like you are guiding us. So I really do appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate all that Hero does. I've been a big fan, for now decades, and I'm just really appreciative of the research, the programs, the conferences, the dialogues, everything that you all have brought together and made available to people to really elevate the conversation. So thank you so much.
Appreciate the opportunity, Renee. Always great.